Bobolink and winter wren. Bobolinks just pass through our area. They head north. Most of them really far into Canada.
What time of year do the bobolinks pass through?
Bobolinks pass through usually pretty close to May 1st. And the spot I go to for them is Warren Wilson. There's a few other big, flat, wide open areas that they'll stop in, and you've usually got like 1 to 4 days to try to catch them. Yeah. Or you can drive up to West Virginia. There's a few areas in West Virginia outside of Bluegrass where I see them. You all up for a couple more songs just while we're on song? Here's the northern Perilla. We heard it this morning briefly at like 9 o'clock. There was one that sang off the balcony, and I'll play it for you. And then who's the bird on the left? Anybody?
Indigo bunting.
The indigo bunting, yes, which is a very common songster in our area. Okay, so here's the northern Perilla. It's a beautiful bird, huh? Northern Perillas, by the way, love to make their nest with lichens. They particularly like to use a lot of usnea. They'll also use green shield lichen, Flavopermelia. And they make these cute little lichen cup nests. And one was nesting in the sycamore tree near my house a few years back, and I just got to watch he and his mate building their nest and tending their young. And here's a song. So up and up and up and up and then down at the end. You get that last little squeak at the end, so it's going to climb up. Northern Perilla. There's another song that it does. In this case, it's kind of walking up the scale and just goes a little bit down at the end. Indigo bunting tends to do its calls in couplets or triplets, so it's often repeating. This is me being dissatisfied with iBird Pro's song selection. It's like, that's pretty close. But to me, it's a little less typical. Thoreau talks about the indigo bunting saying, fire, fire, here, here, put it out, put it out. Just trying to show that it does its songs in couplets. You know, it does one thing and it does it again, then it does another thing, does it again. Occasionally it does a triplet too. A nice songster in our area. Only here in spring, summer, and early fall, then it heads back south again. So habitat is super important for us to learn with different birds. Once you get your mind on little habitat ecology and understand what birds are where, it makes things so much easier. This bird, the common yellowthroat, has a very distinctive alarm call. Distinctive for an alarm call, that is. It has this little note that's kind of like, it's not a whole lot to listen to, and if this bird could be just anywhere on the landscape, I might not catch it. But because I know this bird loves to be in wetlands and right next to wetlands, when I'm in a wetland and I hear that noise, right away I'm like, oh, probably a common yellowthroat. Matter of fact, these days I know it well enough that I can hear that note and just distinguish it as a common yellowthroat. So common yellowthroats in our neck of the woods in the mountains have two different habitats they like. One is around wetlands. They'll be in thickets next to wetlands. They tend to be low to the ground. Usually you see this bird below 10 feet. The second habitat they really love is high elevation balds. If you go up to a high elevation bald like Craggy Gardens or Roan Mountain, you'll get a bunch of common yellowthroats all around the edge of the bald. I just had some up at Sam's Knob at Tennant Mountain. There's a bunch up there singing away right now. Really nice time to go up there and bird, by the way, because the trees are just leafing out. Lots of caterpillars, not a lot of leaves to block your view.
What mountain?
Black Balsam Knob or Tennant Mountain. Right near Sam's Knob Trailhead is the parking lot. South on Blue Ridge Parkway, beautiful area. So common yellowthroat, one example would be, is a bird of wetlands and high elevation balds. Here's a couple other birds that are nice and habitat specific. I often go out of my way to try to find because their habitats aren't that common in the mountains. On the right-hand side, we have the American Kestrel, absolutely, with this nice sideburn and the orange tail. And it loves meadow voles, and in order to have those, it needs meadows. And interestingly, one of the habitats that we have a lot less of in the mountains is big, wide open meadows. Not only does it love meadows, it loves to be in a high perch where it can look over a meadow. And you'll see, if you find an area with a nice big meadow like that and a power line, I would watch that power line frequently, and I'll bet you'll see a kestrel sitting on there bobbing its tail at some point, looking for mice or field voles, meadow voles.
Grasshoppers.
And grasshoppers, absolutely, yeah.
They're very common right down the road here on Schoolhouse, almost every time. Certain times of the year when I drive down, you can see the kestrels coming off the power lines in the fields.
Schoolhouse Road.
Where Bold Rock Cidery is.
Right, you can see them quite regularly too, right behind the Mills River store.
Oh, okay.
On North Mills River Road, on the power lines and around there flying.
How many folks live in the South Mills River area? Okay, because it's just excellent birding. Matter of fact, there's a famous spot down here. There's South Mills River Park, and behind that there's a big agricultural area, about 2/3 or 3/4 of which is a sod farm. I think it's called Super Sod. Super Sod turns out to be one of the best birding locations in western North Carolina, largely because it's French Broad River floodplain, blue jay flying by, and when the French Broad floods, it turns that area into a huge shallow lake. And somehow or another, a lot of birds that prefer the habitat of shallow water, things that are mostly way out on the coast and near the outer banks, they get blown here by storms, or they're doing some random flyover and they see that habitat and they come right to it. And we get some rare birds there when the French Broad floods that just, the habitat is right, and so somehow they find it. I don't even understand how it works. It's just amazing.
Which is right now.
Which is right now, it's flooded, yeah. Yeah, there's birders there right now checking it every day because it's flooded and they're gonna see cool stuff.
So they're birding from the park?
There's a little road called Hooper Lane that you can walk to from the park and walk along Hooper Lane and back. If you're gonna go off the road onto the sod farm property, you should ask for permission first. Yeah.
Or across the street where there's another Living Web property.
Or there's another Living Web property. Who would they talk to if they wanted to bird that property, Michelle?
I live there.
All right.
There are 2 ponds there now too, so, and some wetland habitats we installed. So you're welcome to come observe. As long as you sign the form, the release form.
Anyone recognize this weird hulking bird over here? This is a Yellowbreasted Chat. It has unusual repertoire of songs, almost like a mockingbird, except that rather than changing it up every time, it's doing the same thing almost every time. Yellowbreasted Chat I put up here because it has a specific habitat. It likes very early succession forest. So when there's been a big disturbance, like a wildfire or a clear cut, and all of a sudden everything is growing back ferociously fast in the first few years, that's the habitat for this bird, early succession forest. And so both of these birds aren't that common around here. I have to find specific habitat that is right for them and go to it. And if there's been a big burn in some area, or a hot burn where trees actually died, or if an area is being managed, one of my places I go to, actually for both of these birds, is the Sandy Mush Game Lands up in Sandy Mush near Alexandria and Leicester. And don't go on hunting days or check the hunting season or wear bright orange. It actually is okay to bird on hunting days, but you know, at your own risk. And what you don't want to do is disturb hunters. And since we both like to be there early in the morning, I try to avoid hunting days. Hybrid Pro did well this time. That's classic Yellowbreasted Chat. That's just what you would hear anytime. This unusual mix of things that don't sound alike. Sounds like 3 different birds are coming together here. Again, the big picture is habitat. Yellowbreasted Chat has a special thing it likes, early succession regrowth. Kestrels like big open fields. Hooded Warbler I could have put on has a special habitat. It wants to be in forest. Kentucky Warbler wants forest, but it needs to have a thick herbaceous understory. Birds like specific habitats, many of them. Then there's some like cedar waxwings who just wander around and it's free for all. But a lot of birds you find by going to the right habitat. And those habitats will be listed in the field guide. Location on the landscape. So both of these birds actually sang today, but they were far enough away and short enough in song that I didn't point them out. Brownheaded Cowbird is often a hard one to spot because it likes to be at the zenith. It likes to be at the pinnacle of the tree. When I heard this bird do its really quick hiccupy kind of song, I immediately just looked up at the tops of the trees to see if I could see a silhouette of a dark bird way at the top of a tree, because that's how you usually see brown-headed cowbird. I tried to choose a picture that showed that, right? Whatever spruce or pine this is, this bird is at the very tippy top of the top branch. Very classic for brown-headed cowbirds. Brown-headed cowbird, anybody heard of this bird before? What's it famous for?
Laying eggs and other birds' nests.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an obligate nest parasite. The only way that its young gets raised is by it putting its eggs in other birds' nests. Now, a lot of people highly dislike this bird for that reason, right? Sometimes it'll put its eggs in a nest of a bird that hasn't adapted to detect the fraud, and then its eggs are made actually to hatch quicker. Not only that, but its young have mouths that are particularly large and particularly yellow, and they have all the symbols that attract the attention of the adult, and they'll actually sometimes push the other baby birds out of the nest, or they'll just beg so much from the parents that they'll get all the food, and sometimes the bird's natural children don't make it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so a lot of people hear this and just think, that is a horrible bird, you know, oh, how could it live with itself? But then I just want you to like think about the other side of this. Can you imagine that? You just take your kid, plop it in somebody else's nest, and they raise it for you? Genius bird, right? Brown-headed cowbird, by the way, this is one of our close relatives of the honey guide of Africa. Do you all know the honey guide? A bird that's famous for its relationship with humans. It goes into villages and actually identifies individuals that have helped it before, and it will do a little song and dance and lead them to a bee's nest, often up in a tree or something. And those humans will then use fire or smoke, particularly, to smoke out the bee's hive and go in and get some of the honey. And then if they want the honey guide to help them again, they're going to have to give it part of the hive. Particularly, the honey guide is looking actually for the pupa of the bees. And so, you know, the humans will somehow climb themselves up the tree and get to have the honey, but they'll give some of the pupae to the honey guide, and supposedly it will recognize them and go back and seek out those same individuals again. Pretty cool. I've heard that that is confirmed as true, not as myth. The honey badger, though, has not been, to my knowledge, confirmed as a true story. It may be. There's plenty of things that happen in the natural world that humans haven't laid eyes on yet, or haven't got any verified footage of yet. It doesn't mean that they're not true.
That bird, if it goes to someone and they don't share it, it won't show them anymore.
Right. Yeah, totally. It's like, no way. I'm going for somebody else. So brown-headed cowbird, worth knowing is that this was a bird of the Midwest and wasn't really found in the East. So a lot of the birds of the Midwest had adapted to see its eggs some of the time, if not most of the time, or build another nest on top, or ditch their whole brood because something was wrong. They couldn't tell what. However, humans have cleared huge amounts of forest in eastern United States, bringing the brown-headed cowbird to the east. It wasn't that common in eastern forested areas at all, in our eastern seaboard at all. And these days it is, because we've cleared enough of the forest and opened up enough agricultural field that it comes in and finds the habitat that it likes here too. Its song, by the way, is very abrupt. It's a very fast, high-pitched noise. It's high-pitched enough that it can be hard to hear, and it's a very quick kind of electric hiccup is how people describe it. Eastern bluebird is another bird that I heard in the distance. I heard it right where I expected it to, across in that big open field. It landed at one point on a wire. It was pretty far. It was like 3 poles down, so I didn't bother to point it out because we would have been looking at a teeny bird in the distance. But this is one of those birds that location on the landscape is very predictable. They're going to fly from the big wide open space where they just grabbed a fly up to a wire, whether it's on a fence or it's on a telephone wire. They love those open perches. A third thing that they like to land on might be a bluebird house. There's been a pretty good successful movement to help the bluebirds increase their populations by putting up bluebird houses. They're cavity nesters, and so for a long, long time they've been nesters in dead trees. Well, these days with us, taking so much timber out of the forest, we have a lot less dead trees than we used to, and cavity nesters sometimes have a harder time finding their environments. Old trees, particularly trees that died in fields and have been left to stand dead in fields. So people have put up bluebird nests. There's been a lot of success. One of the things, however, that bluebirds have to watch out for is they're not very keen on this one. And so a lot of times you're trying to make your hole a specific size, hoping that it will keep the brown-headed cowbird from popping in and putting its eggs in the bluebird nest. If the hole of your bluebird house is too big, it very well could get parasitized by the brown-headed cowbird. Behavior as means for identification. Anybody recognize this kind of nondescript bird on the left-hand side, or what group it's in? It is a Phoebe. Awesome. And what group is the Phoebes in? Anybody? They're in the flycatchers. It looks a lot like a catbird. I can see that resemblance. So our flycatchers have really short, abrupt, mostly kind of guttural kind of songs. They're not very melodic. Have you all heard Phoebes before? Do their Phoebe, Phoebe, Phoebe. Actually, there's one singing here this morning early before class started. I'll do a Phoebe call for us. The thing about these flycatchers that's interesting to me is that their songs are very simple. They don't hold true to most song of birds, which is melodic and full of different tones. But their songs are instinctual rather than learned. Most birds have to learn their song from their parents. But Phoebes, you can separate one out, incubate it, and it will get up and it will go, Phoebe, Phoebe. That one's fairly musical as Phoebes go. The reason why I have it here under behavior is because a lot of these flycatchers look very much alike. If you go to the flycatcher section of your field guide, you're going to see like 12 birds that look about like this. One will have slightly wider wing bar. One will have a little bit lighter color on the breast or a little more yellow right in the flank. One will have a bill that is 2.5 millimeters shorter than the other. You know, there's like really small differences. One will have a different eye size to head size ratio. It's like, come on, really? Binoculars? Song are helpful to tell them apart, but even song can be tricky. But some of them have behaviors that help us distinguish them from the other flycatchers. So the tail of the Phoebe, it hangs out and bobs its tail a lot. Anybody here get that thing when they drink coffee and they just can't stop moving their leg? Like Phoebes are doing that all day long. They just bob their tail and bob their tail. Once in a blue moon, one of the other flycatchers does bob its tail, but it's not a regular habit. So that's a nice, even if it doesn't sing, if you see a Phoebe fly out, loves to be near water, but isn't always near water, fly out, it will sally out and catch a fly and come back to the same perch. That's called sallying. Fly out, grab something, come back to the same perch. They'll sometimes, when I put my shovel in the ground as a gardener, or my pitchfork, they'd fly and land on the shovel and then go grab something from the ground and fly back to the shovel and grab something. And they'll be real close to you. They're real friendly birds. But it's the tail bob that's letting me know it's not an eastern wood pewee. A least flycatcher is in the same group and has a smaller head, which makes its eye look bigger. So some people say you can tell it because it's cuter, but that's not a whole lot to go on if you're trying to be accurate. One thing the least flycatcher does, though, that's once you see it enough, you can get the knack for it, is it sits and it does this. It sits on a perch and it just goes back and forth a lot. And I had never noticed it until another birder pointed it out to me. And since then, I've been watching least flycatchers do this scanning thing where they go back and forth, almost like the watch light, in a jail compound or something like that. You know those searchlights and everything? They're looking for the runaway. Here's a beautiful local warbler that we have come back. It's one of our first long-distance migrants to come back. This is called the black and white warbler. And the black and white warbler spends a lot of time crawling around on the trunks of trees. It'll even be upside down on a branch. There are some other birds that do this, like the nuthatches do this as well, the white-breasted nuthatch and the red-breasted nuthatch. Probably if you saw them, you wouldn't mix them up. But just by behavior, this is one of our few birds that climbs around regularly on the trunks of trees, upside down, right side up, going nose down or up. Most of the other warblers you're seeing out at the tips of branches or in bushes or something like that, but this one likes to be on trunks. So just that alone gives you an identification clue. This here's a hermit thrush, beautiful singer. A lot of thrushes look pretty similar. One of the places where time of year can be an important identification feature is a lot of thrushes look similar. There are little field identification features, you can tell them apart, but time of year can be a great one. In the wintertime, this is our only thrush. So the chances of seeing a wood thrush or a Swainson's thrush or a gray-cheeked thrush in the middle of the winter, probably not going to happen. You know, you could try to report it, and most people are going to be like, yeah, sure, right, okay, we'll add that one to the books. So just the time of year, the season, and the location can be a good indicator. So make sure you check your field guides and your range maps, and they'll tell you what time of year to expect something. Occasionally, you get something weird that's out of its season, but for most of our species, it would be very untypical. Honoring routine, I talked about, here's me with a group of folks just doing a gratitude circle. We'll probably also took time to breathe a little bit. We probably also took time to listen and smell the air and just try to bring ourselves into a calm state. Try to leave work behind or stress behind. Not that we're like ignoring those things and pretending they don't exist. The aim is just to sink in and try to be connected with the landscape and our senses. And I really think this is a hugely valuable thing for getting to connect with animals and the natural world. Again, this is, you do the honoring routine regularly before you, even if you're just walking your dog in the woods, do a little honoring routine before you go in, and you'll be amazed that like you'll see a black bear. Maybe you don't want to see a black bear, but you'll see a black bear. You'll see the fox. You'll not be triggering birds to alarm because you have that busy mentality, the hunting mentality, or just like, you know, you're not tuned in and you're being disruptive, and birds alarm you, and of course the foxes listen to the birds and the deer listen to the birds and everybody's listening to the birds. So if you've got bird alarm traveling way ahead of you, you don't get to see very much. But if you take your time and you're mellow and you calm yourself before you walk into the woods, the birds tend to not alarm you as much. They may take a little distance, but they're probably not going to send out a, hey, watch out for this one message. And therefore, the fox probably won't be as likely to be triggered by your presence. Matter of fact, as you get really used to moving into the woods in a way that doesn't cause bird alarm, you have to learn how to read bird language to do that. But you can actually use it as feedback and see what is affecting the birds and what isn't. And the more and more you practice moving in the woods in a way that doesn't cause alarm, all of a sudden you get a lot closer to animals, and a lot of animals are just like, how did you get here? Like the birds usually tell me anytime a human's coming by, and like here you are just showing up. Oh my goodness. By the way, one other thing that I haven't mentioned yet that I think is really important, there's this little strategy called sit spot. It's when you go to a fairly natural space. It could be right out here in the garden. It could be your backyard. It could be a little walk in the park. And you just sit and have a seat for 20 minutes or an hour. And often it takes about 20 minutes before you really kind of sink in and before the animals are like, cool, this person is fine. They're safe. They're good. So what is a bird? Anybody know offhand the feature that like distinguishes birds particularly from other creatures? Hollow bones. Turns out that there are both some fish and some lizards that have hollow bones. Hang on, Mike. I know you know the answers. I'm not going to call on you right away. How about flight? Is flight distinguish birds from other? Oh, no, right. Flying squirrels, insects, bats, right? Ah, yes, indeed. Feathers are probably the number one thing we use to distinguish birds from a bunch of other different life groups. And it turns out that feathers have had quite a long history, right? Turns out that birds, as we define them, is a very ancient group. By the way, I talk a lot about evolution and Earth systems ecology and evolution of life. It's one of my favorite mythologies. If it's not a mythology that you're excited about, then just don't worry about it. There's lots of good mythologies out there. And there's many different versions of the mythology of evolution. So take your pick on the ones that are most exciting to you. But in one of those mythologies, we look at a group of reptiles that evolved their scales to become feathers. And likely this happened through scales becoming more and more textured and offering insulation that helped keep these reptiles warm during different temperature changes on the planet. There's also a group of reptiles known as the theropods. And the theropods are actually warm-blooded reptiles. It's like, wait, I always learned that reptiles were cold-blooded. I know there's all these little scientific exceptions and variations and unusual things. Well, over time, they developed down feathers to help keep themselves warmer in cold environments. Some of them, I think, were already gliders. They already had, reptile gliding ability. Some of them did some flapping things, we think, by looking at their anatomy, like wild turkeys do today. It's like hard to say wild turkey like really flies, but they do. They do this thing where they can burst away and they can fly for a little bit. It's hard for them to sustain it for very long. And we think that some of the ancient reptiles had that ability to flap and cruise away from potential predators. Combine that with the development of feathers over time, and eventually we got some miraculous flyers. Argentavis magnificens was a bird that lived during the time of dinosaurs. This thing had a wingspan of 23 feet and was a predator. Adaptations for flight. I think it's worth us just taking a moment to be like, wow, some birds fly a lot. They're flying creatures, and what a remarkable thing flight is. I used this bird as an example. This is the wandering albatross. This bird is 12.5 feet wide, its wingspan is. Can I use you for a moment? Will you stand up and just spread your arms out like this? So we are now probably showing you about 12.5 feet. So it's a bird with a wide wingspan. Thank you very much. And wandering albatross is one of a number of birds that are, I call them sky creatures. This is a bird that prefers to be in the air for almost all of its life. It wants to touch down as little as possible. Matter of fact, the main reason why wandering albatrosses ever hang out on the ground is simply to raise their young. At some point they need to have an egg, and the egg needs to be somewhere, and they need to keep it warm. And that part is a little too tricky to do in the air, it seems. But almost everything else they do in the air, including eating. Sometimes they'll be scooping out large amounts of insects in the air. Sometimes they do catch fish, but then they immediately come back up into the air. They're not hanging out on the water. Mating, they do their mating and courtship all in the air. I mean, these birds, sometimes in their first year or year and a half, won't ever touch down. They'll stay in the air entirely. That means that they also sleep while they're in the air, as much as birds sleep, right? So not all creatures truly sleep. A lot of them just go into states of torpor or rest. There are a number of strategies birds use to do this. Some birds have one side of the brain go to sleep while the other side stays awake. In the case of the albatross and some of these birds who stay in the air constantly, they actually mostly go to sleep, but parts of the brain stay on and aware that are the parts that control the angle of the wing. Because what's going to happen is that these wings have been incredibly designed for lift. We've designed our airplane wings after these bird wings because there is a flat surface on the bottom, or sometimes it's a little bit arched, and then there's a rounded surface on the top. And so when the air comes and tries to go over that, the air at the bottom can move straight and fast. The air at the top actually has to expand in order to cover the same surface as it's going by. So the air at the top actually becomes less dense. The air in the bottom is denser, and so the natural force, the phenomena that happens there, is for it to push whatever object is there towards the area of less density. And that is the force that we call lift. So the wind is coming to this arch. It's going to go quickly underneath. In order to keep up with itself over the longer distance, it has to race. And as it races, it actually expands, it becomes less dense, I should say, and thus the wing moves upwards to go to the space of less density. That is the force of lift. That's actually what makes sailboats go forward into the wind. That's how our planes want to keep forward. So all they have to do now is keep their wing at the right angle with some oncoming wind. Find the altitude where there's a little bit of a breeze or an oncoming wind, and just keep that wing at the right angle, and they can sleep in the air. Pretty cool, huh? I don't know if I would want to try that or not. Hopefully your pilots don't do that. Although these days I guess they do.
What size is the body in comparison? Is it like a goose or a duck? I mean,
The females get up to 25 pounds, so they could be like a big goose, almost like a swan. The males are a little smaller. Yeah. This bird migrates from South Africa over to South America and up the waterways along the coast all the way up to North America, all the way up to Greenland and even Iceland. And then some of them actually continue across Europe and head back down the coast of Africa. Others actually come back the same way they came and then fly over the Atlantic again. They're just hanging out, flying all over the world, having a good old time. staying in the air for most of their life. Pretty phenomenal. Other adaptations for flight, in some ways this bird is kind of an exception in its weight, but you can see it makes up for its body weight with these enormously long wings. Most flying birds have adapted instead to reduce their weight in order to have the potential to have smaller wings and to be smaller creatures. It's actually easier for most birds to overcome the force of gravity by reducing their weight and size. So we have you've probably noticed a lot of birds are fairly small. Weight reduction is a huge factor, and birds have done a lot of different things in order to do that. So hollow bones is a great example. A lot of birds have bones that are hollow and have air pockets in them to allow for less density, easier to overcome the force of gravity. Reduction of like anatomy. So teeth, can't have teeth. Teeth are heavy. Ditch the teeth, get a beak, right? The weight matters so much, like even just to like fractions of an ounce, that a lot of birds during seed season, their beak will thicken a little bit and they'll have a slightly heavier beak during seed season. And as soon as seed season is over, their beak thins again, just to give them that much less weight so they can fly a little bit faster. Reproductive system, bladder, you know, like you don't have enough weight allowance to have 2 ovaries. You only have to have 1 ovary. We can't have a urinary bladder and a fecal bladder. We need to combine them together. Everything's going to go out of one chute. That's all one opening, the cloaca. So just a tremendous amount of reduction in both anatomy and some really fun complex physiology, such as an increased metabolism. 108 to 111 is average body temperature for these birds because they need to think fast in order to fly and maneuver and respond. A lot of different adaptations have gone into allowing birds to fly. Multispecies flocks. We got our orchard oriole here, and we got our pileated woodpecker, and we got a painted bunting and a blue jay. Here's another multi-species flock here. We've got pine siskins, are the little birds, kind of look like finches. Red crossbills, which actually you could go up to the Mount Mitchell area right now and see some of those. Evening grosbeaks, we don't get this far south. But they're beautiful birds. They might pass through here every now and again, but very rarely. In our area, multi-species flocks are really common, especially in the wintertime, although you'll see them in the summer as well, especially once the juvenile have become able to take care of themselves and almost adult birds. Multi-species flocks, the big concept is that a lot of birds of different species are going to hang out together in order to share the alarm system, in order to be eyes and ears for one another so they can be safe and detect predators. And they're going to combine together and move through the landscape together, listening and looking and trying to be aware of potential dangers. And they can do this because their diets or their placement on the landscape is just slightly different enough, right? Chickadees might like to be in this part of the tree or go for this kind of larvae, whereas kinglets might be going for a different thing. The vireo instead prefers to be up higher in the tree. The warbler is even higher. And so they're going to have different little habitat niches. They're going to be going for slightly different food sources. They get much more benefit from traveling together and have extra eyes and ears to warn them of a sharp-shinned hawk flying in, or a Cooper's hawk flying in, or a black rat snake that's been sunning in the branches. So a lot of different species will come together and move together. In the wintertime, my suggestion is to just keep your ears open for chickadees. And whenever you hear a chickadee, go and check it out. And then you'll find the other birds moving with them. Chickadees or titmice. Matter of fact, in fall time, fall migration can be crazy and wild, and there's lots of birds moving through. Many, many species coming back from the north, but they're not singing very much because they're not trying to claim territory. So in the fall, again, listen for the chickadees or the titmice. Once you find them, go and just look at anything that moves, and you'll start to see lots of warblers and all kinds of interesting characters that are moving back south. I am not going to go over bird language too much. There's a lecture that was already given here and is recorded and is online that is really thorough by my colleagues Clint Corley and Michael Ismario. There's like at least 3.5 hours online you can watch about bird language. It's this awesome, amazing thing. It's actually kind of the primary thing I teach in a lot of places is not just bird identification, but bird language. Highly recommend it. and you'll get to learn some different vocalization groups and be able to quickly figure out if a bird is in song, companion call, or alarm, and what it's telling you about the landscape. So there's a lot of that at Living Web Farm's website. There's a great video. Check it out. I just want to say, for those of you who are getting into birding, every time you make a report into eBird, you're adding to a citizen science project that is probably the #1 tool that ornithologists use in order to help understand and make decisions for bird conservation. In this case, what we're seeing is a species distribution map. These are all points that have been taken by eBird reporters, and this is a species that clearly goes way north. Here it is coming back south in the fall. This time here it's too small to see, but these are months: January, July, August, September, December. And so we're getting to see what the population does in different months of the year. This is just data points put into motion. The brighter it is, the more reports we're given. And so I don't know what species this is actually right here, but here's something. This could be a great one for like winter wren. It comes down here. Here it is. It could be winter wren or white-throated sparrow, something that goes really far north in the summertime, comes back here in the fall and winter. And that helps us like see things like, hey, how come there's nothing here?
Yeah, it really enjoys the Mississippi River.
Right, totally. Yeah, and what's with the blank spaces? Is it lack of birders? That's a possibility. Or is it something about the habitat? Is it that we can map areas of huge monocrop genetic engineering? There's all kinds of information that we get from this. These actually helped us learn a little bit more about what was going on with bobolinks, that really cool R2D2 bird we mentioned earlier. We were finding out that the bobolink population was plummeting, and it took a while for us to figure it out, but eventually we realized that a new type of grass had been introduced that allowed hay farmers to collect twice as much hay. They can take 2 cuttings a year. Unfortunately, the first cutting happened right during the time with this new, faster growing 2 times a year hay. The first cutting happens right during the time when the bobolinks have their nests on the ground in those fields. And so actually the older method, where we were only doing 1 cutting of hay per year, was a lot better for the bobolinks. But anyway, eBird and citizen science helped us realize that, and some of these maps for different species are just awesome. There's many other things eBird do, and you don't have to be a regular eBirder. You could report twice a year what is at your bird feeder. You don't have to know all the birds. Maybe you only recognized 5 of the 20 species. Go ahead and enter those in, and you'll still be contributing to citizen science. Just make sure your observations are as accurate as you can. And they actually have lots of good systems and checks and balances in case people misidentify something too. So that's all being taken care of. Bird feeders, use them. They're simple. Clean them out once a year. Hummingbird feeders, take them down in the fall. I won't say much more about bird feeders, but wouldn't that be fun to have a Lego bird feeder? You don't have to have the Taj Mahal. You can just have a jug or have your kids build something. We're at the end here. I want to remind folks that the local Audubon Society chapter, Elisha Mitchell Audubon, they do local bird walks almost every weekend. You might have to go to Hendersonville or out to Swannanoa, but they're most weekends of the year, like 2 or 3 a month, there's bird walks you can go on. Some of the bird walks are really great and fun. Some of them are a little sleepier than others. But fish around a little bit, see who's leading what week, and sometimes you'll get some really great folks leading some great walks. I highly recommend it. They also have lectures 1 Tuesday of each month at UNCA. Really fascinating topics, all kinds of things, not just birds. You can ask me more about bird apps if you're interested. A website I really love is all about birds. You can look up any bird and find a colossal amount of information there. The CDs and DVDs, I have some laying out here. Feel free to ask me more questions about which ones I recommend. My highest recommendation for learning birds by ear is the CD set called Birding by Ear. And that is one where they walk you through it. They don't just play it and say you're on your own. They take different bird songs, they play them next to each other, and they give you tricks on how to memorize them or remember them. Birding by Ear is a Peterson CD set. You can probably get it digitally these days as well. I, by the way, am a local naturalist teacher. I teach classes on plants and wildflowers and mushrooms. And my website is astoundingearth.com. My business name is Astounding Earth. And you can hire me to come to your property, or I can do a walk in a park near where you are, or your favorite hike. I do bird stuff, I do plants and mushrooms, and come and do slideshows of various things. I also do plant surveys. If you want to know what plants are in your yard, I can type up plants that are there. I also have series in springtime and fall time where we just go out into the woods and we learn about ecology, and we do all sorts of fun walks and games and activities. So look me up sometime if you're hoping to have someone lead you, or your friends who are visiting from out of town on a hike, or if you want to come and do a series in spring or fall. But that is the end of my slideshow. Thanks, y'all, for a fun morning.